You're listening to Writer Unblocked, the podcast for serious authors who are ready to scale their careers with smart strategy. I'm Nicole, your host, and I help authors navigate publishing, marketing, and multi-format expansion, all while keeping the vibe high. Today, I'm chatting with website designer Kate Cross. Kate works with authors to create user-friendly, engaging Squarespace websites that serve as not only powerful marketing tools, but they attract the right audience. Her goal is to make the process stress-free, which we love, so authors like you can focus on what you do best, which is writing. We discuss the importance of SEO, the necessity of newsletters, which I learned so much about, and key components that every single author website should have. Additional information is, of course, available in the show notes or writerunblockedpodcast.com. Okay, let's dive in. So, Kate Cross, welcome to Writer Unblocked, and thank you so much for being here. This is going to be such an educational, eye-opening episode.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. And yeah, let's get started.
Let's educate the audience a little bit first. How about yourself, but specifically how you got into web designing for authors, which is like the Lord's work.
Yes, indeed. It is one of the most dreaded topics in the area of books and book writing and book marketing. But yes, my name is Kate Cross, and my background is in literatures, cultures, and languages. I was a graduate student, total and complete book nerd for many years. And while I was pursuing my studies, I actually did my first website for one of my professors. She turned to me one day and said, "Do you want to make some extra money over the summer?" And I said, absolutely. What do I need to do? Because if anyone's ever lived on a graduate school budget, you know what I'm talking about. And she said, can you just redo my website for my literary journal? And I a little reluctantly said yes, but it turns out it was one of the best decisions of my life because I fell in love with website design. Flash forward 4 years, I was teaching and I would come home from work and find myself making fake websites to unwind on Google Sites, and did a little research and realized it was actually a career. So I ended up going back to school through online courses and learned as much as I could about website design. I then worked for an SEO agency as a junior SEO for a little bit to learn more about the technical side beyond just the aesthetics of website design. And after returning from a nice long maternity leave, I have a 15-month-old, I decided to relaunch my own freelance business to focus specifically with working with authors.
That is, first of all, a lovely journey to this point. I want to get something out of the way real quick because I suspect we're going to say this a lot. SEO.
Yes.
What does it stand for and why should we care?
Yes. Okay. That's a wonderful question. So search engine optimization, SEO. Essentially what this means is if you build out your website correctly on the front end and the back end, it makes you much more easier to be found in Google. Meaning if somebody searches for your author name and your book genre, there is a chance that, well, you should be able to pop up right at the top of the search result if you have done your SEO correctly.
Right. This is very important. We're gonna touch on this, I'm sure, throughout the conversation, but I always love breaking down the acronyms for people. And SEO is a big one in the audiobook space. And still on the topic of you, Kate, I read on your website that you are an audiobook fan. And you know that is music to my ears, no pun intended.
I am an audiobook fanatic. And actually right now, since I've had my daughter, I've only been reading audiobooks, which is so surreal coming from a graduate program where I would be reading hours and hours and hours. I literally was paid to read for many years. But my favorite thing about it is I love the voice actors. And I know you have mentioned this before on your podcast. I am one of those people. I fall in love with a voice actor and I will buy a book because Imogen Church, for example.
Imogen Church.
She is my hero. I would love to meet her one day. If she has narrated it, I want the book.
She is really, really good. She is really, really good. I am the same way. I will pick an audiobook based on the narrator. And I will then,
Mhm.
on Audible, you can click either the author name hyperlink or the narrator hyperlink. I click on the narrator name and I see the results of what else they've narrated. And that's how I pick my next listen.
That's amazing. I'm guilty as charged as well. I really enjoy that. And then I hate when they switch the narrator in a series. Why? Why are you doing this to me?
Why? I know. I remember we would have to tell an author, we need to delay your launch because if this narrator is overbooked and we need to wait for them, we need to wait for them. Like there's no
Yeah.
way we cannot change the narrator. Um, well, interestingly enough, speaking of websites and audiobooks, when I was starting to work with self-published authors in 2011, 2012, when Audible launched the self-publishing arm, ACX. I remember telling authors who had websites and who were pretty successful self-publishing their print and ebooks, and they were now exploring audio, you need an audiobook section of your website. And they were so eager to like do it, and they would
Mhm.
show it to me. They would send me the link. They'd be like, look, I did it, Nicole. And it was beautiful because you could listen to sample, right? So
Yeah.
you could embed these audio clips into your website. And so I just remember that very distinctly all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, we were pushing these authors to dedicate a section of their existing website to the audiobook format. So I was very proud of them for doing that. Just wanted to say.
That is an amazing idea. And I really think looking at your website as more than something that just exists, but an opportunity to create an immersive experience makes all the difference. It makes the difference for you as the author because you'll actually enjoy your website more and want to send people there more. But it also makes a difference for your readers or even other industry professionals who are wanting to learn more about you. There's nothing quite as powerful as hearing someone's voice, too.
Exactly. Okay.
Mm.
So whenever I talk to an author right at the beginning of their journey, I often hear, I need a website.
Mm.
And then they get so overwhelmed by just that statement that they either do absolutely nothing or languish for a really long time. So what is I guess we could start the conversation or like what is a starting point
Mhm.
for a brand new author? What are the what are this like the bare minimum elements an author website should have, for example?
Yes. So I love this question because I think that my one of my main goals as a business is to alleviate the overwhelm. And to answer that question well, we would have to know where that author is in their author journey. Now, time I've interviewed countless people across the industry, it's what I do for fun is I ask industry experts questions. When should an author launch their author website? And they always answer as soon as possible. So if you are an author and you don't even have the book completed yet, you are still just typing or handwriting it, you still want to get an author website out into the world. And to alleviate that question, what do you put on an author website before I even have a book cover or a book? I would say in that case, you want to introduce yourself further to your readers. And that would be your name at the top, an introductory paragraph about you, and then a really juicy newsletter sign up section. What makes a newsletter sign up section juicy rather than lame is you really want to have something that you can offer your website visitors so that they'll want to opt into your newsletter. So that could be character art, it could be annotated notes of your rough draft of your writing. It could be some of the research that you've gathered in order to write your book, something that will pique their curiosity so they'll want to give you their email. And then the great thing, once you have their email, you can then inform them of when your book is finally out, etc. If you do find yourself though in the position where, oh my gosh, this is when most authors come to me. I have a book coming out next year. It's with a publisher, but I need a website. What do I need? This is when you would want to make sure that you have a really striking, clean, informative book section on the homepage of your website. You're going to also want to follow the rest of those steps, though. You're going to want to have an about section. You're going to want to have a newsletter sign up section. And then, depending on your needs and your marketing strategy, that's where we will decide to build out more pages. Some of my favorite pages for a basic author website are a homepage, an about page, a book page dedicated to that book, and a newsletter sign up page, a separate page for that. And we can talk about why that's very strategic. And then the next one is a contact page. So those would be like the core five. But if you're marketing via book club, if you want to do book club marketing, make a book club page with suggested questions to ask. If you want to get into blogging, we'll talk about what a good approach for author blogging would look like.
Yes.
But those core five are the key.
Oh my God, there's so much to dig
I
into
know.
with what you just said. It's okay. Let's start with the newsletter, because
Yeah.
first and foremost, for me, I've always heard, and I know this is absolutely true, you don't own your social platforms, right? Instagram
Mhm.
can go down any minute, Facebook, all those things. You don't own it. And so you might have 10,000 followers, you might have 30,000, you might have 50,000. You don't own those contacts. And so the minute your account is I don't want to catastrophize, but it has
Yeah.
happened to people where like Instagram will delete your account and will not reinstate it, and you can't reach a person for
Mhm.
why. Or we have seen on occasion people completely lose their minds because Instagram and Facebook went down for like 15 minutes. So I that is my first reason I always tell authors, like, you have to have a newsletter because you want to own your contact list. But and you're connecting. Some of those things you just mentioned about what you could offer in exchange for like what you would offer through your newsletter, right? Even if it's I don't know, what's a cadence? Like once a month. Some people might do weekly, but like once a month seems like the right uh kind of update cadence for an author. But like, let's talk about why is this so important? And I definitely want to hear from you why you think it should be its own page. This is the first I've heard this tip, so I'm very curious.
Okay. So reason being, and I think social media has done wonderful things for authors. There's nothing wrong with it, but social media is the beginning. And what you're doing with your author website and your author newsletter is you are creating a direct connection with your readership, as you touched upon already. And what that means is if something were to ever happen with your social media platform, either your account or the platform itself, you still have a way for readers to directly find you by Googling you if they wanted to get in direct contact with you. And it's not just readers, it's also other book industry professionals. But you also have a way to directly get in contact with them if you have put a strategic newsletter sign up across your website, meaning you have had a newsletter sign up that people will actually sign up for. And so I'll touch upon that and the why we want to have a separate newsletter page right now. So nobody's going to sign up for your newsletter if you just say sign up for updates, for writing updates. Maybe your mom, maybe your best friend are going to sign up for that. But people, we kind of want something if we're going to be giving out our email. And it's such a great way to showcase your personality through that opt-in gift. On my website, I list out 10 creative newsletter opt-ins on my blog. So go check that out, get inspired. If you're a nonfiction writer, checklists are gold. People love a good checklist. If you are a fiction writer, people really a really good idea is it might be a little extra work is giving creating a prequel
Mhm.
for your book. That's one idea. But if you don't want any extra work, which I don't blame you, giving the first three chapters away for free. I have heard in the past it used to be suggested to give one chapter away, but that wasn't really quite enough to bring readers into your world enough to want to keep reading the book. So it's now suggested to try to give around three chapters away. And those are just two simple, straightforward ideas. There, again, is more on my blog post over on my website if you're curious to learn more. But the reason why we want to have a separate page. So typically when we think of newsletter sign up in website design, you're thinking, oh, I'm just going to pop that on my homepage and that's that. No, we want a separate page, particularly for authors, because you want to be sending people directly to that page in a variety of ways. And you want to send them to one page where there's only one action they need to take. Sign up for your newsletter, because that is how you are going to get the most conversions. And conversions is a fancy word for that's how you're going to get the most signups. And the way that you can use this is directly on Instagram, for example, in your stories. Instead of saying, hey, come check out my website, or hey, come download this cool new thing on my website, and then you link out to your homepage. Now that a website visitor is going to have to scroll down and find where that cool thing is. Whereas you can, if you have a separate page for the newsletter, you could say, hey, come download this cool thing. And they click the button and they're directly there. All they now have to do is download their email. It goes beyond social media though, Nicole. That's what I love this is fantastic for in-person events as well. In Pinterest or all these other ways that you can market your author business. It's just a really efficient way to grow your email list.
I love that. And I'm obviously not an author, but I am going to change my website today and have a separate section because I also have a newsletter. And you're right. You're right. Call to action and friction points is such an important are such important elements of design, right? So what are you trying to get the person to do? And you have to understand how little people's attention spans or their time, right? Like if I'm going to click on one thing and I don't immediately know what to do, I'm going to, what is that? Like abandon cart, abandon, like abort, like I'm moving on
Yeah.
to my next thing. So I think that is so, so valuable. And I don't, obviously I'm going to put in the show notes, but for our anxious listeners who want to go right now, what is your website?
Guidedwebdesign.com.
Guidedwebdesign.com. It's so clear what I'm getting. Guidedwebdesign.com. I love that.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about having a more educational approach to my web design process. Although I am the subject matter expert, it's so important to me to empower my clients or my customers, my website templates, to be able to work within their websites. So I decided, I was like, I want to be your website guide. So Guided Web Design is you can find me over there with lots of website tips for authors.
This is great. This is great. Okay. Were there other sections we wanted to? Okay. So obviously we talked about the newsletter. There's an about me section, right? Because we want the author to tell us about themselves.
Yeah, let's touch on that a little more, because I heard something really interesting and I liked it. So I want to share this forward. If you are only going to have an about page, it is suggested to write it in the third person as an author, because that is where journalists are going to be trying to capture information about you if they want to interview or highlight your book. But if you're going to want to write that in the first person, which traditionally is the way to do it, because writing in the first person creates more connection, you're going to want to have a media kit page. This is another page on your website, and that's where you put your official author bio, some pictures of yourself, some links to other interviews that you've done, and reviews of your work. That's a good starting point. You can also, if you're going to do the 2 pages, the about page and media kit page, make sure you're linking to the media kit page from your about page. That just makes it easy for busy journalists, busy podcast hosts to find the information that they're looking for.
Yeah. And I will plus one that as someone who searches for guests for my podcast. It makes it so much easier when I find authors who have all that information available on their website. So I will plus one that as a very realistic use case for why you should have that. Okay. So an about me page and the media kit embedded in there so that you don't have the media kit also as part of your, like, say, your top menu, for example, taking up space. Okay. So then, okay, so we have newsletter sign up, we have about me, obviously the book or books if you've published multiple, right? But you want a section to display all the things people need to know about your book, where to buy it.
Exactly. And what's so interesting now is there are so many possibilities with that book page now. A lot of options for authors of how they want to go about the purchase, linking out to purchase. Right now, we can embed Amazon listings directly onto your books page. What embed means that you can put the button to buy your book from Amazon directly on the page of your website so they don't end up going out to Amazon. And from with conversion research would suggest that that converts at a higher rate than sending somebody out to Amazon where they might accidentally see another book that they want to buy instead. Keeping them on your page tends to be the most strategic thing to do. It
That's
is not
smart.
the most common choice though. Typically authors are just having a button that links out to all the places where their book is available.
Yeah, I see that, like the Barnes& and Noble button, the Amazon button, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Okay, so we have the book, which is the content, the merchandise, so to speak. Which, by the way, I know I interviewed an author who actually has a merchandise section as well because she started doing mugs and T-shirts and things related to her book universe. So it was very smart to also add a shopping section, which was fantastic.
We should talk about this because I'm a big believer. I think part of the problem, one of the hills that need to be climbed with author websites is they cost money to have, especially if you go the professional route and you actually buy your domain. They cost money to have. And it's such a drag paying for something that is not really seemingly helping you make any money. So I love the idea of monetizing your website through adding custom merchandise or maybe have using it as a place to create events around your work that are paid for events, etc. I do think it's a really great idea, something to keep in the back of your head once you have your author website built. You can say the next step is, all right, now how can I actually make some money from this website in a way that feels authentic to you and creates a little bit more of an experience around you and your work? There's nothing wrong with that. I think people love immersive experiences. One of the best things I've seen, I imagine this is somebody else. I saw an author, she creates book boxes that are aligned with her Italian romance novels. So it comes with like a wine glass and then a shirt that says like "Ciao Bella," a T-shirt, and I think that's so fun to, you're as you're reading your book, you feel that you're there more when you have those immersive merchandise.
I love that so much. I know this particular author, it's like a romance erotica type of trilogy, and she had like, the candles, which I thought was so clever because like you light the candle, then you write your book, you read the book, and it's right. I feel immersed in the environment.
You
Right.
could have a lot of fun with that theme.
Right. There's a lot to be explored there. So, one thing that came to mind as I was hearing you talk what about the merchandise was when you said events, where would you recommend if authors are quite busy enough and they're attending a lot of events, where would I put sort of like I don't know if it's like where you would find me next type of thing or like here are the
Mm.
conferences where I'm going to because you would have to update that quite a lot if you're going to be doing that.
Well, the great thing where I build websites on Squarespace, it's really easy to add an events page and update those events listings. So I think that would be my go-to suggestion is just you create an events page and then you add to it. It's very intuitive and straightforward in the
Right.
Squarespace website. Another thing that you could do is use the announcement bar at the top of your website, which people never know what this is, so I'll try to describe it. So, an announcement bar at the top of a website, I always say, imagine you go to ralphlauren.com, and right up at the top, it lists all the sales and the code to get 50% off fall
Or free
jackets
shipping, free
or
shipping.
free shipping. Just enter code free ship and right up at the top. We've all seen it. That's an announcement bar. And I think adding in your upcoming events on the announcement bar is a great idea because that's seen across your entire website. Doesn't matter as people are clicking through, they're going to be seeing that. And it typically registers really well for the website visitor. They really recognize it.
I love that. Yes, I've seen that before. I also did not know what to do with it, but that is a really good idea. I think I've seen some people use it more for like sign up for my newsletter, but to your point, again, that should be its own page.
Yeah, but you could do both.
Right.
I've done both on my own website. I have a free homepage. I have a free author homepage checklist, and I'll put it up there. Author homepage checklist. I also have an own individual landing page that it leads to, so you can do both, which is totally fine.
Right. Right. It's just directing people all to the same call to action,
Hmm.
which is sign up for my newsletter.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about the contact us pages. I am always very nervous about that page because obviously, I've seen people try to put a form or type out their email, but put the spaces so that I'm assuming they do it so they don't get spammed. So, and I haven't looked at this in a long time. So I'm curious you know, how people nowadays set up their contact me page. Is it still more traditional to do a form? Like, how do people get in touch? Or what's the best
I
way for
would
people to get in touch, rather?
Y That's a great question. So definitely don't do anything strange on a website. If you confuse, you lose. So doing any spaces to prevent spamming, please don't do that. I would stick to a form. Forms aren't perfect. You can sign up for certain form software that will help filter spam better, but for the average person, you are protected enough in that space. When you have a form on your website, what happens rather than putting your email is someone enters their first and last name and their message to you. So that means you don't have to be giving out your personal email without until you're ready to respond back to them. And if you want to respond back to them. So I do think as of right now, that's the practice that I see and the least complicated approach to that.
Yeah, I do because I think that the brackets are trying to obscure the email, but also give the email. It's tricky. It's
Yeah.
confusing. And also, you're like, is this for real? Is this a real person? Is this a real email address?
Yeah, and
Um,
again, I don't suggest doing anything that's even remotely confusing on a website. That is never a good idea.
I want to say if you confuse your lose should be a T-shirt on your website. I always tell people I'm like put that on a T-shirt. So,
I'm doing
um,
it. I love this idea.
yeah, I mean it's so straightforward advice. What other Well, I don't want to focus on the negative things, but like I do want to make sure we highlight like what other pitfalls or mistakes, for lack of a better word, would you say you see authors make on their website aside from not
Okay.
having one?
Yes, yeah, not having one is the problem. But the main thing is it's really comes down to creating a professional and cohesive environment that draws readers in rather than pushes them away. And let's talk about how you would do that. So, the pitfalls that I often see is a very cluttered website. um, White space is your friend. That means you want to create space between words and objects across your website. You want to be able to put your hand up to your website on the screen and have your hand be able to cover white. That is a big helpful thing. It's very hard to describe this over audio, but you really want to have white space on your website. The other thing is poor font and color choices. I think that it is grossly underestimated how much that impacts an energy around a website. And this is actually not even exactly website design. That comes down to your author branding. So, working with a brand professional, if you have the budget for that, is always a wonderful idea because they'll be able to help you pick out fonts and colors that will look good on the screen. Just because it looks good on your wall does not mean it's going to look good on a website, or just because the color looks good on your book cover does not mean it's going to look good on the website. And branding experts can find colors that will accentuate your book cover and the rest of the aesthetic that you're going. I do think that this is a hurdle for a lot of authors because they come to me wanting a website, but they very rarely have professional branding done. And in that situation, what I do is a branding consultation, which is not a full branding service. Brand designers, that's actually a different career than website designer. But what I do is we discuss the various vibe that you want to have your website, and we look live at your website at with entering different fonts, some of my font recommended fonts that I have a whole database, and recommended colors. And when in doubt, if you're DIYing this, I highly suggest leaning into neutrals. What that means is if you can't afford professional branding and your book is a bright red book, for example, instead of just going on the internet and saying, I like this red, and putting that across your website, it's probably a better idea to lean into whites and blacks. That can be a creamy off white or a charcoal black, but that's a really good way to make sure that the focus stays on your book and visitors are not distracted by branding that isn't just quite right, if that makes sense. So I think that's from a design perspective, that's the biggest problem. From a strategy perspective, not to beat a dead horse, but it's just not understanding the goal of your website, which I really believe should be to be capturing emails, i.e., growing your email newsletter. And there's great free resources now available. I'm so passionate about sharing everything I know for free. So write this down if you're DIYing your website. Head on over to Pinterest. And what you can do is search for color palettes, neutral color palettes, or blue color palettes. These color palettes are typically designed by actual professionals. So you're already warmer than just trying to DIY this yourself. And then also look for recommended font pairings. Those two things will help get you closer to having fonts and colors that look better. And you can even use a Chrome application called Color Picker to capture the colors that you find and then use them on your website. So there are workarounds if you can't afford to work with a brand designer, where you can still make educated decisions.
I love that. I love that. So let's talk about platforms, because
Mm.
that's the other confusing aspect for authors who are not very into this stuff. Like, everybody, I mean, we know there's Squarespace and Wix ads come up all the time when I'm on YouTube. And you and I have had conversations prior about WordPress. So let's
Yeah.
talk about, can you tell I'm not excited about using WordPress? But that's just me and my
Mm.
personal experience with WordPress, and just how complicated it can be for the needs of my website.
In the land of website design, there is so much bias based upon where the designer learned to work, which website builder they learned on. They often tend to stick there, except in the case of WordPress. So I think we should talk about the bias before I go into why I like Squarespace. Back when websites were evolving, when needing a website was evolving, WordPress really was the place to be because it had all the plugins. Plugins are little applications that allow you to do specific things on a website. It really had so much more flexibility and opportunity rather than looking at a Wix or Squarespace. But over the last 5 years, so much has changed. Wix used to be the go-to for an easier website because it was drag and drop, meaning that you can drag text wherever you want on the screen, drag images, making it just really easier rather than needing to use either code or blocks those are a little bit of techie terms, codes or blocks to set images in text where you wanted. But a couple of new drag and drop editors have hit the scene. And I also want to touch on Shopify as well. So Squarespace is now drag and drop, as is Showit. So Showit is technically WordPress, but people really like it for its aesthetic, but it's harder to learn. Squarespace is so intuitive and it's beautiful on the user end. So people who are switching over from WordPress to Squarespace usually love it. The bias against Squarespace, though, which you'll hear if you listen to some older website design podcasts or YouTubes, is Squarespace used to be a platform where you had to use specific templates that had word limits and specific, they would have, you wouldn't be able to, it was not very flexible if you went back 10 years ago. But nowadays it's completely drag and drop, just like Wix. It has built-in email newsletter marketing, which authors love. Like, that's the main reason why I'm noticing authors are coming to me, 90% of them from WordPress over to Squarespace, because they want to do three things. They want to have a website, they want to have a newsletter, and they want a blog. And all three of those can be done really pretty effortlessly in Squarespace because of their intuitive approach to website design. So that's why I do recommend it. But I always say this because you can become good at any builder, but some are going to be easier than others. And I quote one of my customers who bought my website template just last week. We jumped on a call really quick, and she said, "What was I thinking with WordPress? I had no idea it could be this easy." So,
That's the thing. I have to weigh in with my own experience. I also struggled with WordPress and I moved to Squarespace, and this podcast has a section of my website dedicated, and it supports it. Right? Squarespace supports
mhm,
the podcast. It has a blogging capability, which I want to talk to you about, blogging for authors and the website, what you recommend. And yeah, integrated. I didn't touch that. We didn't touch upon this earlier, but the other part of confusion for authors about the newsletter is, okay, and then how, like, what do I do with that? And it's like Squarespace has a whole newsletter backend, right? So that
yeah,
you can send the newsletter, you could do the whole thing.
exactly.
You don't have to go to another platform to then do your newsletter.
You're only learning one platform, which is always good. You'll be in a different corner of that platform, but you're still only on that one platform. And I do like to mention the great thing with Squarespace too is its e-commerce capabilities are good. They're really good. It's not the same as Shopify though. Shopify is typically recommended for people who have over 100 products.
Okay.
Definitely go to Shopify. There are also beginning to be a growing case for Shopify for authors who are really interested in direct sales. You can still use, not to get too technical, you can still integrate a $5 a month Shopify store onto your Squarespace website to do direct integration with these direct printing companies, print on demand companies. But if you want a more e-commerce based author business, look into Shopify. Though again, most authors, they don't want a huge store. They do want something more simplistic, and Squarespace also has the option to add a shop onto your website as well.
That's easy peasy, or easier than having all kinds of disparate pieces to having to glue together. But I want to
Yeah.
talk about the blog because, gosh, blogging has been around for so long, and obviously I've seen a lot of author blogs. They exist. People put them on their website. I noticed though that like, I'll check on an author's website and the blog hasn't been updated in like 2 years. Like, what is your feeling about author websites and the blog?
So typically with blogging, it's a part of content strategy, i.e., it's part of marketing. So you should never be blogging without strategy behind it. It's particularly good traditional SEO blogging, which means you are writing your blog so that when people Google something, your blog post will pop up and they'll click over to your website. Traditional SEO blogging is great for nonfiction authors. It is the most evergreen way to it is, the most sustainable way to market a business, but it takes a while. So it takes 3 to 6 months to start seeing any results on very niche topics. If your topic is not very niche, if it's something very broad, it can take 1 to 2 years. So you just have to know what you're signing up for, but it can be a great option for nonfiction authors.
Got it.
But for fiction authors, I was very skeptical. because I don't think many people are typing into Google romance authors. Like, when I say that, like romance, let me try to think of something really specific, but some really specific romance scene. Not many people are really Googling that and then going to end up on your website and find your book and purchase. But what is a great way for fiction authors to use a blog about maybe a tropes in their writing would be to not only write the blog, but then you want to be strategically posting that to Pinterest. I am currently been I have been learning a lot about this from an author named Melissa Bourbon, and she has a course on Pinterest for authors called Writer Spark. And I was so shocked that Pinterest was so powerful, and because I have a background working in as an SEO agency, I went and I snooped because I can pull up all the traffic from any website on the internet. I snooped on the back end of her website, and she is killing it with organic through Pinterest. She has about 10,000 people visiting her website. I couldn't believe it. I've never seen anything like that. And so I think that would be a great place to look if you are an author interested in learning to blog. I would check out her course because she seems to be walking her talk. And I can't wait to learn more from her about how she is making that happen.
Pinterest has become like it's silently got in there, man, because I remember being on Pinterest all the time just for more like clothes and ideas on how to do a Halloween costume for my kids. And now it's like, first of all, it's very targeted. Like it knows whatever algorithm it's using, it's very good.
Yeah, and the way it works is it is a visual search engine. I am not a Pinterest expert. I'm sure everyone listening can tell I'm not an expert, but I know it is a visual search engine. And what's so cool about it, unlike social media that tries to keep you on the platform, is every time you make a pin, like let's say you make a pin of character art from your book, that pin needs to link out to somewhere. So you would want to link that out to your website where
Right.
then people can be introduced to your book.
That is so smart. That is so
Yeah.
smart. See, I always tell authors to use Pinterest for author boards, but this makes a lot of sense. So we're
The
definitely going to put that in the show notes.
yeah, the reason why I want to speak to Melissa further on this topic is in our brief conversation, she just spoke to how she felt so overwhelmed by the social media and had that moment. What's the point of putting in all this effort when I think she had a Facebook group where people weren't actually even reading her books. She said, "What's the point in doing this?" And she said that just switching all of her marketing over to Pinterest has created so much more lightness in her life. It takes like a tenth of the time, and she has more time to write now, and it markets better. So it's just definitely someone to watch on that front. Maybe she'll guide a lot of authors into a more gentle way of
A
marketing their
gentle
books.
way. Well, people are hitting a tipping point. I remember right before TikTok got banned for 5 minutes, so many authors who had just surrendered and said, okay, fine, I'll get on TikTok. And then it got banned. And that's why I personally don't post on TikTok because the uncertainty of it and like all the work that I would have to put into it for something that I just don't even really know what the ROI is on all those views anyway. So I love a gentle approach. It's not a traditional hustle of social media. And like, what am I really doing with this like
Mhm.
constant posting? And I have to have this many stories per day. Otherwise, the algorithm will hate me. It's very intense. And what we want authors to do, or as a reader, what I want authors to be doing is writing. I need them to write.
Agreed, agreed. And it's so hard to do it all alone. But I think that being sure, especially with marketing, whether it's a small business like I do or your book business, which is a small business, setting time, try your best to set time limits. That way it doesn't just take over your life.
Yeah.
I have found that very helpful in my own personal approach is I outsource where I can, where it makes sense to. And then, I have more time to spend with my daughter, my husband, if someone else is helping me with X, Y, and Z. But then, that's not possible to do with everything. So the things that I don't really love doing, I do them for about 15 minutes a day rather than spending 2 hours on especially on Instagram, because that is not evergreen content. That content has such a short lifespan.
Yeah.
You don't want
No,
to spend too long.
this is great. This is a very educational episode, Kate. So I'm really excited. I want to talk about what is going to be the inevitable question, which is the cost, even if it's a range.
Mhm.
Like, what could an author expect for the most bare bones website, or what is a DIY route versus working with someone like you to take care of it from end to end, for example, or what's in between that, like the templates that you offer.
Talking about cost is so important because, money is an important part of our lives. And the good news with websites is the costs range so much. I know you can have websites that cost $10 a month. They might not be the highest quality, but you could get something out there in the world for very nominal budget. But if you want to have websites that have more modern, I like to think of it as modern design behind them, you're probably going to be looking at author website templates. Author website templates typically cost between $100 and $300. Just depends on what you're looking for. There are I haven't really found any free author website templates that I would recommend. But I'm sure there's always free options out there. If you want to actually work with a designer, you're typically going to be investing between $1,000 and up to $5,000, depending on the complexity of the project. So that's just a range. It really is project dependent.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and then on the little line item, I'm thinking back to how I do my costs for my business, right? So I know my domain costs me, I don't remember, like $20 a year,
Mhm.
right? Then Squarespace costs me one something, 100 and change. But there's a higher tier that I could go to. I don't host my newsletter on Squarespace, so I forget how much I'm paying for that. But I think if you host it on Squarespace, there might be a separate charge for that
Mhm.
per year. So I'm trying to like total in my head, like outside of the design, just on the basics, someone could be spending 200-300 a year just for the like just for the software, right?
Yes,
Ballpark, like $300 to $500. I mean,
I think that's a good ballpark. That's more of a realistic ballpark for Squarespace specifically. A lot of websites built on WordPress, they can be cheaper, but then you end up needing to pay for a maintenance plan, which is usually at least $80 a month. That means your website designer stays on for the year and updates your website for you because all the plugins that come with WordPress need to be updated. So I think I just read that on average, small businesses are paying closer to $5,000 a year with WordPress. But again, that is if you're outsourcing the maintenance involved with
right,
your website, which
right.
you don't need to do with Squarespace or Wix.
No, not at all. And like I said, like if I started off with the bare minimum, and I remember it was like, yeah, like not even $20 for the domain and like $120 for the year for Squarespace. Um, so my whole website before I got a designer and a brand, which I highly recommend getting a brand person, um, just to get the website up, it was like less than $200. And then you add on to that. And then you're like, okay, now I want to buy a template or pay Kate to design my website, or add the newsletter component, or upgrade for the e-commerce. That's the upgrade, yeah, the e-commerce on Squarespace. So yeah, just to give people a sense of like, if you really want to start with the barest of minimums, it's not cost prohibitive. You can have,
Yeah,
even if it's literally a single page website to start, you could start that for a couple $100 a year.
exactly. Yeah. Or I would say closer. I would budget more $200 a year,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
all things said and done. That's what I would budget with Squarespace specifically. Um, and the great news with that, what you could do, rather than buying a template, because I sell templates that have been designed for authors. Although Squarespace doesn't require you to use a template, there are templates on there that are free. And you could try to find one that maybe is more geared towards a speaker, and tweak it for free to your author business. You will still have to pay that $200 a year for subscription costs for your domain and to use the platform. But that is another way to approach it rather than staring at a blank screen.
Exactly. I think it's the designing from scratch that is very intimidating. But when you get to start from a template, whether a free one from integrated in Squarespace or one that you purchase, it is so much easier to edit. Like I tell authors, like, don't, edit a crappy draft as opposed to edit nothing because it doesn't exist, right? So like when you when you can when you can edit a web page template, it's a lot easier and less intimidating than blank page. And then you have all the elements on the right hand side, and you're like, which one do I start with? Like, where do I put text? Where do I put a picture? It's come such a long way, and it's so much more accessible. And I know you share the sentiment, like every author should have a website. Every author should have a website.
Yeah, but such a big believer in meeting people where they are, especially budget wise. It's okay if you cannot afford professional design services. It's okay. I did make my website templates that are, available for purchase to have a lower barrier to entry, where it is the designs that I actually use with clients. You can have them, you have to purchase them. Just because I know not everyone has four figures to drop on a website, and that's okay. Just start where you are, and you can always update, change, build out your website. Maybe you'll take a Squarespace class or a Wix class to really learn your stuff if you feel called to do that. There really are just so many options for authors.
Yes, I agree. I agree. We're changing. I want to hear from listeners who have listened to this episode and went and got their website up and running. And I want to see them. I want to like see screenshots of all the different websites. There was one last question I had website related, which is, and this I'm seeing this more and more, when you have authors who are writing in vastly different genres that are very visually or aesthetically very different, like how could you tackle that on a website when you have such a different um variety of content?
So the way I would do it comes down to organization and then aesthetic. So from an organizational point of view is make sure I would put all the genres of books. Let's say you had 3 genres of books. I would make a drop down tab in the navigation that just says books. And then in there you would have the visitor would have the ability to click on the genre and then be taken out to a page that's specifically dedicated to that genre. Now, if you also, which you probably would want to do this, you want to feature those genres on your homepage. Just make sure they're not crammed next to each other. As I mentioned, it's perfectly okay to have one section that's thriller and another section that's romance, so long as there's space between them. This just goes back to using more space across your website. Now, from a branding perspective, how do we approach colors? Because that psycho thriller red would look great, and black and noir tones would look great for your thriller novels, but not so great for your rom-com novels. So what I again encourage authors to do who don't have professional branding, like if you worked with a professional brander, they would walk you through that. A brand designer, I would suggest leaning again into those neutrals because all those genres look great with a white background and black or off black in your navigation and footer. So just don't be afraid of undercomplicating it because, as I mentioned, if you confuse, you lose. If someone's looking for a romance novel and all they see is thriller red all over your website, they're going to feel very lost and confused.
Right. No, and I talk to more and more authors. I have an author client who is like, I've written all this romance and now I really want to write something else. So there, there is that scenario of authors wanting to, and rightfully so, they want to branch into a different body of work. And I think that's really good advice, what you just said in terms of, being able to still keep it all on your website and still have it be cohesive and have that kind of breathing room around it where it's like, oh, I can read her romance and I can read her thriller, and I understand what I'm looking at. So
Exactly.
I love that. Well, Kate, as you know, I always like to close out my interviews by asking, what would you like to be true 12 months from now?
I would love for authors to feel so empowered with their websites that they can't wait to show them off. That's the message I'm here to bring is it can be easier, it can be fun, it can be joyful. And you got to actually send people there for them to visit. So don't forget to send them there from your events or your social media.
I love that. Kate, thank you so much. I'm going to link so many wonderful things in the show notes for our listeners. And I don't know, I may be contacting you soon for some website help as well. I think you're wonderful. If you're listening, please go to her website. It is beautiful, and it just makes me feel like there's nothing like landing on a nice, beautiful website. So thank you so much for sharing this knowledge and agreeing to be on the podcast. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. Can't wait.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. For more information on today's episode, please check out the show notes or go to writerunblockpodcast.com. Before we wrap up, if today's episode sparked ideas for your author career, don't let them sit in your head. Take action. If you are ready for high impact support, I offer one-on-one strategy sessions to help authors like you navigate your author business with precision. Head to reignitewithnicole.com to book a session or apply for any of my author programs. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a fellow writer and leave a review. Thanks for listening to Writer Unblocked, and I will see you next time.